Hello and welcome. And we're going to get started. In a world racing towards artificial intelligence and artificial general intelligence, what if just around the corner, another disruption is quietly unfolding? We've been tracking the rise of thinking machines, but something else is accelerating. Not intelligence, not consciousness, but speed. And what if that future is dialing in now? Petabits per second, signals racing down strands of glass faster than we can think, faster than we can react. Not magic, not myth, just light bent to our will. What happens when machines can talk to each other with no delay? When distance disappears not just between devices, but between decisions? Sci fi imagined this. The Ansible, the subspace channel, messages that cross galaxies in an instant, not faster than light, faster than thought. Now those stories don't feel so far away, and as latency vanishes, what else starts to disappear? Friction? Reflection? Distance itself? That's our show today. This is the Sci-Fi AI Show, episode 15. Woot! Recording this at 4 p.m. Eastern on June 6th, 2025. And in the studio today, we have Jyunmi Hatcher, Andy Halliday, and I'm Beth Lyons. We're tuning into the future of communication faster than thought and delighted to have you join us. All right, Jyunmi, over to you. What we've been talking about this back and forth in terms of the discoveries that are being done it's scientifically right now, right? Like this was in fact, for people who are listening and watching, this was a conversation that we had a year ago, and it seemed like a good show then. And so when we looked at it today, not only is it also a good show, there's so much that has changed. So Jimmy, yeah, will you give us a little bit of a sense?
Sure. All right. So, what is communications going to be like as proposed in science fiction? So, some of the common ones are how does communications happen in Star Trek or Star Wars, right? They use a technology that allows communication over vast distances over a huge network, communication network, that allows communications to be relatively real time for coordination amongst all of the Federation or
Call Starfleet.
yeah. So how is this accomplished, right? Because we know that no matter what we have in terms of speed, we can't go faster than light, right? That is the speed limit of this reality, programmed as it may or may not be. All right. Uh, so how does communications get accomplished in these sci-fi examples? Well, in both Star Trek and Star Wars, they use a different space locale. They use, you could describe it as another dimension. It's described as subspace or hyperspace, right? A locale that allows you to bypass the normal limitations of regular space and the speed limit of light. The speed limit of light. So, so what this does is what a lot of sci-fi does is let's take this basic conceptual format or framework that we've heard little bits of theories and hypotheses out there that this kind of thing could exist, and use that as a way to circumnavigate or circumvent our current understanding of the universe. So while the concept of hyperspace and subspace have been around for a while, both in the scientific community and the science fiction community, it is a way to not travel faster than light, but to circumvent the speed limit, right? As a lot of sci-fi tech does so. And I think that's the main takeaway that I get from most sci-fi instances about communications, right? Even now, like it's a 30-minute trip to send a radio signal to like Mars, right? Or 15 or 20 minutes, something like that, to it and back. So that's one of the closest things that we got. I think I'm not sure if Venus or Mars is actually closer to us, but you know, sending a signal there, getting a signal back from like our rovers and things like that. So you can imagine further and further out you go, that's going to just become longer and longer. And this is still within our own solar system. We're not even talking about interstellar space. We're not even talking about intergalactic or, you know, galactic space or out between galaxies and things like that. So how does communications get achieved there? And even in those two examples, communications is at most near real time in the galactic scale. Right? So where are we now in terms of communications technology, right? Like I said, just communications using our radio transmissions between here and Mars is a 30 something minute round trip. What are we seeing from the latest developments? Now, there is a couple of technologies which I'll throw out there. We can go into more depth, but number one has been the idea of, and we've discussed quantum computing, but as part of that is quantum networking, right? Being able to distribute information throughout a network. And so the ESA, or the European Space Agency, has done some work in using quantum entanglement or confirming quantum entanglement between particles that exist at, I think it was the 144 kilometer range, right? And that's enough to be able to measure that these states were changing from one entangled particle to the other entangled particle. Now, there is still tons of hurdles before everyone goes wild and goes, hey, well, that means we can communicate. Now, well, we probably can't communicate in the traditional sense, but I imagine down the road, this gives the idea of sort of like a telegraph in the sense that if you could adjust a bunch of particles to be in different states, right? Because there's a couple of different states, positive or negatively charged, on one side, to then have a change on the other entangled particle, you could then read that as potential information. Now, there are some issues with this as well because of the wonkiness that is quantum entanglement in and of itself, and the whole observer relationship. But if what we are seeing from AI and how it can reduce errors, right? AI is able to accomplish or potentially help with error correction, as we can see with quantum computing, then that may also translate to things like quantum networking and quantum entanglement. So that's kind of one of the far out science things that we got there. Now the other one, and this was something that Beth, we had been discussing and you had brought up, was the advancement in the amount of bandwidth and transmission distance for that bandwidth with our current systems using fiber optics.
Right.
And there is some huge advancements in that, like being able to transfer reliably over a petabit of information over 1,800 kilometers. Now that's real science. They've been able to replicate it, and that just happened in like May. so some huge advancements along those lines. Now, is this the same kind of thing where we're going to be using it for communicating in near real time with starships. No, but it is a component of
Hmm.
what amount of information we would need to send over, especially if it was just going to be a burst transmission.
Hmm.
And we can go into things like other other ways to circumvent the speed limit. And
Hmm.
we'll talk about like wormholes, and we can talk about lensing or bending of light or gravity, and those kinds of things. So
Yeah.
lots of things to talk about.
One version of the opening had light bent to our very will. Andy, what are you thinking in this context? Um,
So as we discussed before the show, my curiosity is around the whole idea of quantum entanglement of particles, which Einstein described as spooky action at a distance,
mhm,
where if you know the spin of an electron in one location and you know there's an entangled particle on the other side of the galaxy, you instantly know what the spin dimension is of that particle, and
mhm,
they align. So if you then change the spin of this particle, then it changes on the other side of the galaxy. But the reality is that um, particles aren't just fundamentally already entangled. Like not every particle is entangled with every other particle.
mhm,
So it's not the default state of matter to be entangled. And so how do you set it up? And this is the I guess the limiting factor for the hopefulness around whether we could actually instantiate a quantum entangled transmission system across a very great distance, even if it's just from here to Mars.
mhm,
But you could theoretically do it if you can establish a transmitter and receiver that are already based on entanglement of particles in those two different quantum devices, and then you send one of those devices over to Mars. Uh,
mhm,
but there's also some other. I haven't studied it carefully, but there's also some other mathematical or sort of fundamental physics point that you can't actually transmit information in that way. That's
Right,
not.
the no communications theorem. Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah.
So it's not clear how you would ever do that, and that's why in this local project where they're trying to establish a network of satellites that has a highly secure quantum entanglement kind of framework, they're not actually using that framework for the transmission of data. They're just using it for the high degree of uh, encryption, let's say, secure encryption of it by doing something with the entangled particles that are first, I guess, understood to be entangled before you send the satellite up, and then you have something down here that verifies whether there's active encryption between those two, and it hasn't been disturbed. I think that's what that particular project, which is a real
Right.
project,
Yeah.
it's called the Hyperspace project, by the way, but they just use that in a kind of analogous sense. It's not, doesn't have anything to do with any subspace or other dimensional translatable pathway between the two.
that
Yeah.
they want you to
But
know of.
well, I was thinking it's a great way to as a buzzword, right? If you call something the hyperspace project, everyone's gonna go what, right? Because of how popular that word is in science fiction.
Yeah. By the
Now,
way, I want to just read a quick quote from a question that I posed to Gemini 2.5 Pro. And it was the question of, how do you generate a spooky connection at a distance? How is it that particles become entangled? And it said, for particles to become entangled, they must be created as a pair in a single event, or
Mhm,
interact in a way that their quantum states become correlated. So that means that you have to be close enough together in time and space to create the entanglement. And then you can separate them and they remain entangled. They don't lose that entangling once that's created. But it's that means that you have to travel at sublight speeds, to
mhm.
separate them across a vast distance.
So this
well,
is interesting because one of the people who is in our community is a twin and was, right, like a single thing that was then split. And this seems to me that it's kind of like twinning in some ways, potentially, um, because that is a communication technology that is, I mean, it's not technology, it's a communication experience that is instant, right? Can you tune into this and have that knowledge? Anyway, Jyunmi, I interrupted you. What were you going to say?
No. That's it. It's okay. Now I have two things that I want to explore. All right. So the first one, what Andy, where you're saying is right, that the proximity and being able to create that entanglement with some sort of event. Now, what about the Big Bang? That was an event where all of those particles expanded. So if you could find all the particles that were entangled at that point, that would be a great way. Yeah, right.
I like that thinking. Yeah. So there may be entangled pairs that you can latch onto even at great distances, but you have to identify that they are entangled somehow. And that means that there has to be communication between both of the positions in space-time, so that you can then use that particular pair. And they're vast distances, beyond the ken of humans at this point. But I think theoretically, I buy your logic. I totally do.
Well, I mean, look, if we're talking about the need for faster than light equivalent communications, then I'm gonna have to make the assumption that we are going to have to solve other issues first, such as being able to travel that distance. So I mean, it's an interesting concept, because that kind of leads me to think that there are potentially these waypoints or markers out in the universe that we can use for whatever we can imagine, right? As long as we find one, then we should be able to find another one. And, in the Star Trek parlance, we can say, we'll just invent a sensor array that detects wackyons, and those wackyons interact with quantum entangled particles, and bingo bango, we've got, a particle, an entangled, quantum entangled particle detector. And then we just send that out. So easy peasy.
And now we've gotten to the place where I'm like, wackyons and tachyons, and like, I love that they rhyme, but I'm gonna need some more information if we're gonna have like deep discussion about it. So
is it time to bring in wormholes now?
Oh, we can talk about wormholes. It's just like how we manifested a wormhole and was able to draw Carl on to the show. Thank you for joining us, Carl.
A Carleon has just traversed the universe all the way from Calgary. All the way from Calgary.
What are we talking about? I have no clue what we're talking about.
Hyperspace communication.
We're talking about the passage of information and or matter over impossible distances today at greater than light speed. Is it possible? Is communication across vast distances possible at greater than the speed of light? And or is travel possible? That's the
or the equivalent of traveling faster than light. Right?
Are we talking about wormholes?
That was the next thing we were going to bring up, is wormholes.
Just bring it up. So let me just mention about wormholes. So they're science fiction, right? And it's a concept that has some relationship to this subject that we're talking about in terms of, spooky action at a distance. So it's a theoretical construct from Einstein, but it's called an Einstein-Rosen bridge. And it's a hypothetical topological feature of space-time that could create a shortcut between two distant points. It's a solution to equations coming from Einstein's theory of general relativity. I'm reading here by the way, so don't think I'm generating this, from my knowledge. However, creating and maintaining a stable, traversable wormhole would require a form of exotic matter with negative energy density that has not been observed and whose existence is highly speculative. So we don't think that wormholes can happen unless we can discover that there is this special kind of matter that has negative energy.
And
Uh,
with sci
well, and I'm thinking, come on, everybody can point to somebody in their life with negative energy. Am I right?
What? Yeah, let's not go into the metaphysical psychic realms, because that could just be a whole nother energy type, right? And emotional energy, man, emotional. I mean, it'd be like Monsters Inc., right? Emotional energy can start feeding or powering things. Okay. Maybe outside of, oh man, that is another form of communication, though. I mean, if we're talking about sci-fi communication, fast
Oh yeah,
light,
we can send a message in a pod through the wormhole to a far distant place if
So-
it could be existent.
This is interesting because for me, this crosses between sci-fi and sci-fi fantasy, right?
Mhm.
Because in like sci-fi fantasy novels, emotional communication or manipulation, right? The ability to like control an entire crowd because of the magic of your music or the magic of your speech or that kind of thing. Like those are my, I can talk for lots about those kinds of things more than I can talk about sci-fi. But very, very cool. Yeah. Like Jyunmi, what were you going to say?
Oh well, the other thing, based on what you're saying, when you talk about music, I mean, music is math, and math is
Right.
the underlying language of all of these things, right? So if we know enough math, we can communicate, our ideas and intention.
Or
But
if you know enough music, maybe you don't have to know enough math because now you just do it intuitively.
well, that's another thing. Like, okay, so what we're seeing from like translation things, and that was like our first episode, right? We're talking about a universal translator. If you could speak all of your math in music, right? It just means however you're going to take it. Just like I like the fact that OpenAI gives me my deep research in a PDF. Why? Because I like to consume things through that format. But these are all just formats for the same, communication of ideas in just whatever form, right? And then we can talk about language and all those kinds of things. But I want to get back to the wormholes, because I got the idea, because the way that Andy described wormholes is those 2 points, right? And close the distance or instantaneous travel between those 2 points. And I think everyone is familiar with the piece of paper analogy, right? Where if you have one edge of a piece of paper and the other edge of a piece of paper, and if you fold them together, they're now touching to each side, right? So you could go from one side to the other side instead of having to go all the way through across, right? That's essentially what's used for wormhole, as a wormhole example. But we were just talking about quantum entanglement and how 2 particles could be quantumly entangled, which could allows them to they are tied together, right? Now this concept could be the basis of how wormholes could function or manifest, right? Because you could have 2 points in space represented by these entangled particles, and whatever the function or energy or exotic matter that causes a actual rift to open in space to cause these 2 particles to come together, essentially, right? So I know we're going really deep into the sci-fi concepts here, but these are all methods that have been hypothesized so that we could maintain certain things that are required for any meaningful narrative of storytelling regarding people far away in space, right? Otherwise, if we're traveling at normal relativistic speeds and we're staying within the speed limit, then generations will pass in between the time here on Earth and any vehicle or group of people we get out somewhere else. All the lights we see in the sky are already millions and millions of years old, right? every star that potentially could have a planet, we're just fine. If we could see at that planet based on the light that we got, right, we were able to observe what was on that planet, it would be millions of years ago to them. Like they could be millions of years ahead, right, so to speak, or into our future if we were to go instantly at that point. So
And-
these are things to bypass those limitations.
Right. And this sort of gets at something that we've been talking about the last couple of weeks, where there is a kind of bias in science fiction because it's an entertainment medium, right? So it like biases toward dramatic events, right? So like a multi-generational travel of a message is less dramatic. Although that sort of message in a bottle in space is also interesting. So in terms of like bending space, the thumbnail is my head on a sophon's body, and that is an 11 folded, like folding 11 dimensions of space into one from the three body problem. Yes. Carl, are you a three body problem watcher, or are you a three body problem
Can you describe
recap?
what that? Can you
Recap
describe?
watcher?
Can you describe what that is again?
The three body problem?
Yeah.
Jyunmi.
Okay, so in terms of science fiction, the three body problem was a book series coming out of, I don't remember the author's name, but it was recently made into a Netflix show. But essentially the premise is these aliens from far in another galaxy were coming to Earth.
Yeah.
And they let us know that we're going to take you over, but we're going to send ahead these supercomputer multi-dimensional entities to keep an eye on you and keep us informed of what you're doing, so you can't stop us. So and of course the heroes of the book find a way around it. That's what I'm noticing for pretty much a lot of sci-fi examples is, no, we're not going to break the science. We're just going to figure out something that lets us circumvent the science.
What's the term for that when any show, I forgot, like happens to find the thing that allows the show to continue?
The MacGuffin.
Yes, but there's another word for it. I forgot what it is.
Are you talking about it's something that comes in out of nowhere and solves all the problems for them?
That one.
That's Deus Ex Machina.
That's okay. Okay, so I guess there's that's always the 2 points. And what I've been remembering from all the sci-fi flicks that I've seen is there's always that, whether it's a MacGuffin or whether it's a Deus Ex Machina that like solves whatever issue that is happening, especially from a science perspective, that allows the show to continue. Because if you think about it, if this thing didn't happen, this show would immediately become normal life, when people would just like, oh, okay, we're gonna have to sit here and do nothing until we figure this out, and you're gonna actually have to do some real research, which is gonna take days, weeks, months, years, versus it progressing, right?
Well, they did come up with. Oh, Beth, are you trying to say something? You're muted.
I'm going to say right. And you're making me think about what we hear the heads of the frontier lab companies talk about, right? Like, but don't we have to isn't there a solution that needs to happen between now and this abundant, blissful future that you've talked about? They're like, yeah, no, AI will do that. That sounds like this, no? Are they just waiting for a MacGuffin? Or like,
or do they have the MacGuffin, but they haven't shown anybody, and they're just teasing it for the next time?
I do think that the foundational AI companies have examples of things that they are working on that is a little bit ahead of what
Yes.
they've released. That I'm pretty sure of. I don't think it's so much of a, oh, we have the thing, we're just waiting for humanity to catch up to a point where they'll accept the thing. I don't think that's going to happen, though. That is always going to be the great plot point for an AI takes over the world story.
And it is almost a direct quote from what Sam said in a conversation at Stanford, right?
Right. Well, that's one of my favorite quotes or clips, is because everybody in the room laughed because they thought he made a joke. But if you read his face, he did not make a joke. Based on how I read his body language, it was, yes, AI is going to solve that for us. It's like, because the question posed something like, oh, what about this kind of thing? And he's just straight faced said, AI will solve it. It'll come up for the answer.
And what I'm thinking of is him saying, somebody was saying, but don't you have to be responsible for how people are adjusting to this or something like that? And he said, we believe it's our responsibility to release them iteratively so that people can catch up to where we actually are, right? But it was totally like, no, we're also not going to be responsible for how everybody reacts, but we are not just like, hey, everything's changed, boom, yep. Deal with it. Like, that wasn't the process.
Well, I mean, that totally tracks for how they've presented things too, right? It's like, here is our new thing, it's up to you to figure out how to use it. It's like, hold on, you don't have any intention behind this? Yeah.
A cool question then. Imagine if, I don't know, whoever invented the transporter, right? The transporter, like Star Trek transporter. Isn't it sort of like, oh, here's the transporter. Okay, you have to figure out what you're going to do with it. Like, is that kind of like, here's the thing though. I'm having this conversation with people. It's like, because people are asking kind of the same thing in terms of who's responsible for what. I think with AI, it's such a moldable piece of clay. And maybe my example doesn't make sense because the transporter has an actual specific function to do from one to the next, right? Versus AI can be made to do anything you technically want. It's up to you to kind of, so how can they, like, it doesn't make any sense for them to be like, oh yeah, so we're responsible for your outcome use, your use, which some people say, well, you are, because you're putting out this moldable clay in the world and people are turning it into knives. I was like, well, there's also people who turn it into shields. So like, what's the deal with that?
I think it comes down to, there will be a lot of debate on responsibility or not. Well, I mean, there are current devices that exist in the world that this debate is happening about right now. But the thing that we're seeing in general, when a company makes something, they have guidance, or they provide guidance on what their intentions are, right? We think this would be great as X, Y, or Z. Now, everyone's going to do whatever they're going to do with the tool, right? With whatever the feature set is, whatever the tool is, whatever the device is, people are just going to hack away at it and do fun and maybe crazy things with it. That's undeniable. But to provide some insight and guidance to go along with it, that is probably the level of responsibility that people are looking for. Just like how we talk about transparency. All right, here are the potential dangers. These are what our red teams are finding. This is the kind of behavior that we're seeing. We've curtailed it by putting these kinds of guide rails, but I don't hear enough of that from most of them. talking about, yes, we are concerned about alignment, and this is what we think should be in alignment. This is part of our alignment sequence. These are the things that we're testing. And the talk about transparency comes through into talking about these things, and I think with a lot of the general corporatism that we've fallen into is don't say anything. Present one kind of face so that we can't be held liable, that kind of thinking. Now, interesting about the transporter is it is the root of a bunch of other devices that the writers for Star Trek have used, like replicators and things like that. And so while it has its single use, it is the basis of technology. And we've seen this in our own technology for lots of others, right? So how do we imagine when it comes to faster than light equivalence types of communication, are we going to see that kind of technology manifest into other places? So I think that might be an interesting part to look at. So what would depending on the type of communication technology, how would that affect how we do other things, right? Because normally it's described as a caveat to make those other things happen. So we can communicate between starships in different sectors of the galaxy because we have this subspace relay array or communications array, so that they can communicate with each other, right? So is real-time coordination over these vast distances not possible without this communication? What would it look like without it? And there's been a few examples of that in science fiction, but how is it a limitation for our own technologies? So I guess that's kind of the direction I'm asking the rest of you. What do you imagine?
So what I heard, so I don't know if any of you listened to Sam Altman talking at the Snowflake summit. He was actually on stage with, I think, Sundar Pichai at the same time for like a brief moment, or it's either that or something else. I just remember because I was listening into my car, and what he said was the companies that will succeed are the ones that he was talking about the developments in AI over the next year, he says, will be to the fact that even your teams of people, it can solve problems that your teams of people would have taken a team of people would have solved, which to me means he's already moving to that level 4 invention kind of category, or they've seen bits and pieces of that already. So I guess like the question then is you apply that to science fiction, because my thing would be, I don't know this, but obviously I don't think as a species or biologically or whatever, I don't think we can go the speed of light. Is that true? Like physically, wouldn't our bodies disintegrate or something if we go faster
Right.
than light?
Right. Yeah. Earlier in the program, we talked about how most examples of being faster than light wasn't trying to change the laws of physics or the long-standing theories of physics, but to circumvent that. So instead of actually traveling faster than light, we're using things like wormhole or warp speed, or those kinds of things. Yeah.
Or the transporter, right?
Or the transporter,
which I don't know,
because
kills you and brings you back to life, right? As a clone.
So I don't know what movies these are, but I'm kind of freaked out when you see movies where like you're at a place for like 10 minutes, but it's actually 3 years wherever you were. I don't know what the physics of that is, what that actually means, but it's like you still have to figure out, it's like, oh, if I went faster than the speed of light to get somewhere, and then when I went back, even though it was only like a year for me, it's been 10 years for everybody else, which is insane. From I was like, wow, that throws everybody off. But the only thing that I feel like when we like, I haven't seen any bits of that where like, oh, 10 years from now somebody invented that, but they came back 10 years, like a year later, and everyone's like I don't know the time space paradox of how that actually will pan out.
Well, this is part of the question, I think, because we're talking about, we're sort of conflating um, matter moving and data moving, but data is really, in terms of hyperspace communication, and far likely to get, like, we're going to get there sooner, because it seems it doesn't require a denial of the laws of physics as human bodies experience them. So, so we are likely to be able to do that. But does that then, is that a form of time travel? Because the ideas are traveling, right?
Oh yeah. Like, okay, so there's a couple of tacks here. Is we could talk about, by using our current understanding of the universe and how vast distances are traveled, and with the speed of light, that if we could transmit or translate a something that is like data that has no mass, then as it reaches the speed of light, it has less and less of an issue, because that's one of the issues, right? If you approach speed of light, any mass gains infinite mass, those kinds of things, right? Now, if we were talking earlier about sending out probes, or with our discussion about quantum entanglement, right? So if we sent out probes with this information, and then traveling at relativistic speeds, then we could send that information out there. And it's an interesting thing you brought up the transporter, because if the data set is transporter data, and you sent a probe, while it may take 100 years, 1,000 years to reach somewhere, you could reconstitute the patterns with the available matter into the state of being before you made the pattern, or when you made the pattern. So like all four of us, we could scan ourselves, have the pattern made, send a probe to go 10,000 years out to a planet we observed and thought was going to be good, and then the pattern gets reconstituted, and now the four of us are on this new planet.
But is it
Right.
the four of us, or is this multiverse theory, and that is, we've spun up another set of us that exists in that?
Well, that
reality?
is the debate of transporter technology. If you make a copy of your information, let's say you could be scanned completely down to the your floating electron fields and each atom and all that kind of stuff, and then reconstituted with any form of matter at some other place. The idea in Star Trek is you are broken up into that, put into the pattern buffer, and then reconstituted with a stream of that information at your location.
Right.
So that you still only had one version of yourself.
Oh,
And of course, they broke their own rules,
of course
because
they
the whole
did.
reason the pattern buffer was invented was so that how could you store the information, right? And so then what happens is, oh, well, what's the error correction of your AI, of your computing device? It's like, oh, all right, we are breaking down that matter and bringing up to reconstitute in the ship, but they see that we can't get a good lock, or we can't get a good stream. So that version stays there, and the pattern buffer loads you up from backup. And then now you have two. but from that instant, you are two separate beings.
Okay.
Has everyone? I don't. So when I grew up as a kid, I had the Star Trek technical manual.
Yeah.
Not very many people had that, right? So
Don't worry, I see you, Carl.
Yeah, see? Okay. So
Andy's got a manual that nobody else has access to.
That's very true. 100%.
I have 0 manuals.
I have a manual that is not, so I can't find it, but what I would love to do is actually I want to see if there's a PDF of this. Upload that and then see if that's even possible. Like, is that possible in is anything in there possible in today's
with today's technology?
Yes, even remotely.
Yeah. Well, yes.
PDF of this.
Oh, nice. Well, yes, because we see. I mean, Star Trek specifically has influenced how certain technologies have developed. For example, the one I think is the easiest one to translate, and we have pretty much shown all the capabilities we have seen of it in Star Trek, is the communicator. Right? The communicator allows you to communicate instantaneously in real time between your location on the planet and the ship in orbit, right? And with other communicators on the planet. So what's that like now? That is a communication satellite with your mobile phone talking to other places on the planet who have a communicator. So that exists. That exists now, right? They imagined that back in the 60s, and we see it manifested, I mean, for the last 20 years easily, even before that, really. But I think that's the kind of things that you'll extrapolate from it. That seemed to be a fairly easy one, right? Other things like dilithium crystals, matter, antimatter, warp engines, and hyperspace relays or subspace relays and things like that, probably a little different. But having a computer that can respond to you, right? Having a computer that can display information that you have called for, right? Computer, please find me all the files on X, Y, or Z.
Yeah.
We can do that now, right?
We can, but there are things that, to me, when you see episodes and stuff, it's like, can't you just replicate thousands of this and that would solve this problem? Or that makes no sense. Can't you just teleport? There's episodes you're like, that doesn't make any sense because you have this tool or you have this thing that's like, if only somebody thought of it at the moment with all 7 of you, your problem would have not existed, right?
Oh, for sure. I think a lot of the writer rooms, the time that writers have spent in their writing rooms, tearing their hair out about how to solve for X, Y, or Z in Star Trek is because because early Star Trek now has created problems for later Star Trek. Transporters are exactly that problem. So the writers have leaned into, coming up with things that will extend the narrative, right? That whole concept of the pattern buffer, that's something that was introduced in Next Gen as a concept to explain how certain things worked in original series. And then the writers leaned into it for later Next Gen and that era of shows when it comes down to a bunch of storytelling. So it's really putting out fires and building new fires. That's what the entire writers' room has been like, because they know their fans will pick it apart.
So here's
you cannot do lazy writing in Star Trek.
No, you can't
get away with it.
But someone was telling me that technically, whenever you beam somebody up or you teleport somebody, that the person that you're teleporting is actually dying, is actually dead, and you've cloned somebody. Or I don't know if that theory actually is in existence, because it's essentially like oh, you've essentially just I think the theory was like you've broken down somebody into whatever
Yeah,
and then
right.
reconstitute that person.
Yeah.
But theoretically, you're actually destroying that person and recreating somebody. So it's like you're essentially cloning over and over and over and over again. I don't know.
Well, it's not so much a clone as it is. Well, I think this is why they use the wording of reconstituting, because a clone takes from is a copy, right, of your source material. And in this case, you're not really making a copy of your source material. You are, and you're remained with the source material. You are using the explanation of taking your source material and just moving it to another place. Because
I have a question here.
Yeah.
When you transport 5 people from the Enterprise down to the surface of the planet, does the mass of the Enterprise decline by the mass of those 5 people?
Yes. The way they explain it, yes. Now, the technology itself and how we think we could get to there, no. So,
and if that's true, how did the mass get transmitted from the one location to the other?
Okay, so this is where the transporter beam comes in, right? Okay. So once you have atomized your source material, it's just particles, right? So the beam shoots those particles down there and then reconstitutes you by using the pattern buffer.
Why wouldn't, if you're sending matter through the beam, why couldn't there be some defensive shield that would prevent transportation into the other ship?
It does. Shields do block transporters.
Yes.
In the Star Trek universe. So, yeah.
One thing I wanted to add is, and this is more, I don't know what the term would be. It's like, are you actually, yes, you are transporting matter, but are you transporting consciousness?
Okay.
Right.
Now you're getting into several different Star Trek episodes where they discuss this, because are you just the particular constituent atoms, right? Yes. Just your current makeup of atoms and electrical pulses of your brain and all that, is that what makes you? Or is there some other thing, a consciousness, a soul, all of these metaphysical questions? And that gets discussed and left into a nebulous answer and then moved on to the next episode. There is no definitive with that. There's always an example of how it goes, how it depicts one answer, and then there's always other episodes that depict a different answer, and they never really truly give a definitive answer of how this works. And sometimes it's just dismissed as, no, we're not going to talk about it in this series. Like there's a particular so in the Star Trek Enterprise series, which is supposed to be before the original series, the early days of the Federation, or technically before the Federation, they have the inventor of the transporter come on board and do some experiments and things like that, because they're trying to create the longest or the most distance, like interplanetary transport. Because if you could create a powerful enough beam to transporter you from one planet to another planet, you have cut down on the need for starships as a whole. And so that was a whole C plot. But there, it was just a passing conversation, a passing dialogue where the inventor is like, oh, and don't even bring up that, oh, you're not really the person you used to be, or, you no longer have a soul, or da-da-da, and just listed off all of these things that the fans had brought up in the past, and he just dismisses it. Oh, that's just nothing. That's just like not worth talking about. Basically indicating to the fans, no, we're not going to cover those in this episode or the rest of the series.
Yes. So which is the hardest thing about when we talk about like some of these technologies. Like I've always been curious. The transporter one has always been, I think, for me, a flashpoint, because if you look at other series, you never outside of Stargate, right? SG1, outside
Yeah.
of that, you never everything has to be like you're physically moving to one location to another for the most
Yeah.
part, right?
Yeah, I think for all of those shows, you're absolutely right, because the transporter caused Star Trek so much problems,
Yeah.
writing wise. So they're like, no, we're just
Yeah.
not going to do it.
Versus like, you know, like if you get into magic and stuff like that, then that is
Sure.
explained.
Yeah,
But when you get to actual like sci-fi shows, you don't see very many, you know, you move one human from another. There may be like say aliens versus predators or something like that. Like aliens can do it, but humans themselves, they kind of never allow you to they never go into that, which is very interesting because it's explained by, oh, you're using alien technology, so we don't need to explain that. But if it's
Mm.
human generated technology, then it's like, well, we have to explain it, so we won't even bother with it.
yeah, yeah.
By the way, I'm running deep research and Gemini research on the Star Trek technical manual to see if any of those technologies can be done within today or in the next 5 years. Just want to see what that actually looked like.
Nice. No, that'd be great. I would like to get us to the point where, because all right, so right now generative AI and LLMs and things like that, they can gather information for us. We can provide some general conclusions, but where's the every person tool that you can say, go figure out this problem, right? And keep studying it until you figure it out, and improve yourself until you give yourself all the tools that you can figure it out.
Mm-hmm.
I would like that AI. Whether that means I have to build a robust computer, or gang together a bunch of computers to run my own lab. But I want that tool. Where's that tool that I can go, okay, all right, AI Bob, figure out transporter technology from Star Trek and figure out everything that we have to invent step by step to get us to that level of tech. Go.
Yeah.
And then you just leave it on for 10 years and see if it figures it out. Oh, Beth, you're muted.
Are we close to that with Sakana's evolutionary model merge? Can we just take these models, right, and put them together so that it has the both content and special knowledge, as well as multimodal capabilities or whatever it's going to need to do, and then add in that it's going to have the ability to evolve itself if it needs something else in order to get to that end result. I mean, to a certain extent, it's not that dissimilar to the to like AlphaFold, right? To the protein folding, or the go run these combinations. It's a relatively, I mean, it's a huge universe, but in the context of what is possible to put in a medicine that would be an antibiotic, it's a relatively known small universe. And therefore, you could just run those complications because they do at some point stop. Like it is a finite universe to be able to do that. Like, that seems like that's kind of part of what this is. Do we know all of the ways that light can be bent, combined? I'm sure I'm using the wrong verbs, but light can be manipulated or transformed. And my question in this is, when we're talking about communication, we are generally talking about a sender and a receiver, right? At its base. And if it is light based, that time period between those might be so fast as to seem instant, right? That's the speed of light kind of thing. What does that mean? That the things that we've talked about in this show, where we start from fiber optic cable and the ability to move at speed, is there resource cost with this, or does this also bring the cost down? Like once the fiber optic cable is laid, or like,
yeah, I think it really comes down to like a lot of things in our modern world, and you can break it down into going even further back than that. But it comes down to energy, right? So that was the two big things or concepts in, like, for example, Star Trek, which allowed humanity to overcome some very large issues, right? Every very difficult issues was they were able to answer for scarcity with the replicator, um, also known as like a nano fabricator, right? And energy production, because they were able to use a new material to first supply the information or the energy, and then later on enhance that process by using a matter antimatter, you know, source, right? They improved the source later on, but they found another source of energy that was um, would be considered near infinite in our for today's standards. So they were able to answer the ability to make anything that you need, and the energy to do it. And with those two concept technologies, allowed a utopia to be built, right? Because those two factors, resource management and resource access, has been a defining um, basis for a lot of the conflict that humanity has caused upon themselves. Is It's always been resources. It comes to survival, then for progress and things like that. So if you don't have to worry about resources anymore, then you solve for a very large, you know, defining factor for conflict.
All right. Well, this has been a great discussion. Do we have closing words, closing thoughts?
I'm really glad that Carl joined,
Yeah.
and I want to see the results of that deep research and post that in the Sci-Fi channel in our community,
Yeah.
our community Slack,
Yeah,
because
yeah.
I think that would be an interesting follow up.
It's it's gone through 39 sources, although I'm a little disappointed in the sources it's using. Some
Uh,
exciting, some not. You're like, why would you go to like Yumpu or Hexus? But it did go to Lockheed Martin. I was like, oh, that's a good source.
mhm.
Mhm.
Popular Mechanics, maybe, but it did go to NASA and science.nasa. And I'm like, okay, those are good sources too. So like, I'm kind of excited to see what it actually comes out with.
Nice. And then next, would we be doing William Gibson's book, manual? What is it called, Jimmy? You look at it periodically to see what the gadgets are. I'm sure he doesn't call them gadgets. There
In regards
is.
to
Ah! I wish I knew what words you used when you were talking to me about it.
but
It was a book, right? And so you
uh,
have it next to you, and like it had the automatic syringe maybe, or like those kinds of devices. All right. This is where Jimmy looks blank and Beth feels stupid, so we're just moving on. Maybe we'll delete that out of the all right. Thank you so much for all the people who joined us in the chat or just watching on your monitors. We do have a Slack community. It's a daily AI show community.com, and that will be where the results of this deep research get posted. If you want to know, it's free. Just go and sign up. And say hey there. We are doing this every Friday from for the foreseeable future, or at least a little while, which may be the same thing. um we next week we are talking about, we have a bunch of shows that are good coming up. We have a drone show, we have a surveillance show, we have maybe a cybernetic show. We have a lot, and we'd love to hear from you. So what do you think becomes possible if we can communicate faster and at reduced energy across large distances or instantly? what becomes? We didn't even talk about the Vulcan mind meld. Like, does this make the Vulcan mind meld possible if you have a sender and a receiver? I don't know. All right. Thanks, everybody. See you next time.
Aloha.
Wow. Thank you. Oh, hey, after show. Thanks, everybody. This may have been in honor. I don't even know what it's in honor of. All right. Thanks.
Aloha too.
Do us a aloha.